Hey guys, Sugar Daddy Shaves here, and I'm going to go through the process that I use to knot a handle, to put a knot in a handle. This is a Finest Badger knot from Golden Nib, and it's about 23.5 millimeters in diameter when you measure across the base of the glue knot, the glue plug here. Now I think they marketed it more as a 24 millimeter knot, maybe even a 26 millimeter. Manufacturers are different. They sometimes take into account the width as it comes up a little bit, or sometimes they just maybe add a certain number of millimeters to it. Because if they were to tell you 23.5 and you bought a 24 millimeter handle, then it would only go so far up to the plug here. And most people want to go just a little bit deeper, if not more. And so I think that's why many handle manufacturers and there's actually some variation between both types of manufacturers, the makers of the handles and also the makers of the brush knots. And so you do have to do your research and figure out which measurement they're giving you. Are they giving you the actual plug dimensions at the base here, or do they add a little bit to it? Same for here. You know, a maker might say this will fit 26 millimeter knots or 24 millimeter knots. And sometimes both, because they've made it 27 or 28 millimeter, and then that way it'll fit pretty much everything between those two values. And so it's tricky sometimes. You do need to look at the details in that regard. And this is one where I yanked a synthetic knot out of this handle. It came out great. Steamed it out, and I've already placed a plastic washer in there with silicone. Now I like silicone to adhere these knots because it's pretty much permanent. Might come out in 5 years, might not. But if you don't, I have had a few pop out on me, but that's because I didn't use enough silicone or there wasn't a good contact patch. So it's my fault, not the silicones. But the great thing about silicone is that even after you've had a knot for a long time, just slow, even pressure, and the knot usually just comes right out. And that's great when you're like me and you find a better handle. And so it lets you be able to use a knot for a nice long time until you search for the perfect handle for the knot benefit. Then you could easily move it to another handle. It also lets you adjust the height. I'm putting a plastic washer in there. I plan to put one more in there. Then I'm going to put the knot in. Maybe with the width of the tiny bits of layers of silicone between the plug, washer, another washer, and then the actual handle itself, maybe those might add up to be a little bit more loft than I want. Well, since it's silicone, pop, start over. This time just use one washer. Piece of cake. With epoxy, nope. All right, so that's why I use silicone. And I use, so far, what I have used is just basic silicone, clear silicone from Walmart or your big box store. And GE makes a pretty good brand. There is a marine grade silicone, and that might be worth it, but I mean, this is working well for me. It lasts forever because you don't need very much. Also, when you put in enough, I think if you were to think of two pea-sized American peas, two pea-sized dollops might be about the right amount. I usually put in about 3 dollops, and so therefore I reduce the size by about a quarter of that amount so that I can have 3, just to have good coverage and also twist the knot to then spread those peas out. But what you don't want, it's great as long as this silicone is kind of down here on the very bottom, of course, and then maybe a little bit up the sides, but that's not necessary usually, I think. You definitely don't want it creeping up into the hairs, and so that's why you need to make sure you don't use too much. All right. So I've got some procedures listed out. I've got some list of items because I didn't want to forget anything. I've already mentioned some of the highlights that have immediately come to my head, but I don't want to miss anything. So what do you need for this project? To put a knot in a handle. Obviously, we've got the silicone, which I showed you. You need the knot, the handle, the a rubber band, because if you put this knot is a cone shape, as you can see. If you put it down deep into a socket, and it could possibly work itself out as the wedge here of the bristles tries to open up and come out of the hole, so it can resist you in that way. And so have a rubber band. I'll show you how to do that in a second. Have the plastic or nylon washers handy. These that I'm using are 3/8 of an inch or 22 millimeter, and I got them at the the bolt and nut section of my local hardware store. And these are 22 millimeter, and so they're not as big as the plug there, but they'll do just fine. They'll do just fine. You know what else is handy in terms of repurposing and recycling? If you're like me and you see these things and you keep them up and you try to put them in a bag somewhere, just because you think you'll need them. A while back with CD towers, when you bought them from the store, you'd have the spindle coming up through the middle of all your blank CDs or DVDs, and then that spindle would come out the top, and there'd be a little plastic washer on the top of that. Perfect size. I've used that on several knots. So that's a good repurposing idea if you can come up with that. But any shape item, I believe you can use American coins, certain ones that are non-corrosive. Now pennies corrode because they're copper, or they have a good bit of copper content. So I wouldn't use pennies. I think nickel might be the one that is non-corrosive, but just to be on the safe side, I always use plastic or nylon washers. And but if nickels are definitely easier to obtain, or if your country uses a non-corrosive metal for its coins and it's about the right size, then feel free to use it if you want. Okay, so we have the plastic washers. What are they, about 2 millimeters thick would be my guess. And not too many other items. Paper towel. For when you press the silicone in, you'll need to wipe up this extra silicone from your fingers and things like that. All right, so not too many items that we need. Now, first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to take the base and clean out that socket. I've already done it here, obviously. Clean out that socket of any old glue, any old stuff. Now, with the possible exception of glue along the very bottom. If it's an epoxy type glue that's just very firm, you can use that as a spacer. And I've done that recently. You don't need to clean it all the way out until you get down to the handle material if you're going to, in fact, put spacers in. And so I would make it flat and then put my knot in there as a dry fit and see if that's the right loft. If you want to set it deeper, obviously keep grinding away at that epoxy or whatever substance it is. But if you've got old silicone or old glue on the walls or in uneven places on the bottom, you got to get that out. You definitely want to have a good roughed up sides on the knot side as well as the handle side to be able to make a good bond. Okay, so scraping away the little Dremel. There is a Dremel tool, or rather a Dremel bit, that kind of looks like my crude drawing here. And this is the spindle that goes into the Dremel or rotary tool. But then it's metal and it's kind of spiral looking and it's a cylinder. And that's a cutting bit that is perfect for this kind of application because that flat bottom is great for reaching into the handle and making and flattening out the base of the knot. So that's a great tool to use if you have that available to you. Okay, so you've got this all reamed out, old glue away. You might even, if it's very smooth, you might even take some coarse sandpaper and just etch a little bit in the floor there of the socket so you get good adherence, all the words there. I usually actually haven't done that and it's worked out fine. So it's an optional step, at least from my point of view. If I start having knots pop out, then I might change my mind. But so far I haven't really bothered too much with that. And then, so we get the base ready, and then we need to make the knot ready. If you've pulled this knot out from another source, then you may have to scrape glue away from the root ball here, and just clean it up. Sometimes I have gotten a couple knots where this flat space here was uneven, and I had to take my Dremel and take the high parts off, because then it's going to sit more flat in the handle. And so just clean that off. Now you do kind of a dry fit. And so in a minute we'll put the rubber band on, but for now, for illustration purposes, I'm going to do it without the rubber band. So if I put it in here, it's not going to go deep. See, look, do you see how it popped out? I push it down all the way, and then it lifts out. That's because those bristles want to expand, and that is why we use the rubber band. Okay, so what you're doing here is you're looking at the loft. If I've definitely had knots where with a brand new handle that perhaps I've ordered, it's got a nice deep socket, and so it squeezes the bristles and it doesn't let them splay out right away. If you like a lot of backbone, that may be what you want to do, but it's going to depend also on the knot. The finest 2-band type knots like this aren't going to splay and open up quite as easily as silvertip knots. I've got a silvertip right up here. See the two types here, and this one has a lot. See how it's just so much easier to splay, and so these knots I will mount a little higher. I'm sorry, a little lower than average, whereas these knots, because I like medium backbone, maybe slightly less than medium backbone, I will mount these guys about as high as I can get them, and that has served me well with Sterling Finest Badger knots and Maggard SHD knots, as well as Elite Razors. I think it's a Manchurian, but it's a 2-band like this one. And so all three of those I had to mount as high as I could get them. And so that's so how deep you choose to mount them is going to be your option, your choice. And the great thing about silicone, if you mess it up, you can always redo it and change the depth. All right. This one, as you can see, lets you know of another option. If you have mounted one a little too high, you can actually use an O-ring at the base to simulate mounting it a little deeper. So sometimes that's a great way to configure a knot once you've already got it in the handle. If you realize, wow, this is too floppy, it splays way too much, I'm going to need to set it deeper. Well, take an O-ring, put it around there, see if use it a bunch of times, see if that's the right depth. In a couple of cases, I've needed to put 2 O-rings, just put another one right on top of this first one, and then see how that feels. And when it feels right, when you add or subtract O-rings, now you know that I need to sink this guy, in this case, maybe 2 millimeters deeper, or 3 millimeters, I don't know exactly, but that's the amount I need to set it deeper to get the right feel that I want. So that's a way to customize it. This is kind of a first draft here. And then when you like it, you can then redo the handle with the right amount of spacers or lack of spacers or whatever. All right. So I've figured out that without the silicone, with just putting spacers in there, I like 2 spacers. And right now I am having to press the knot down a little bit to get it to touch the spacer fully. And so I think I'm going to still want, because when you add silicone between all the layers, and I may have mentioned this a second ago, it may put it another millimeter higher than you initially dry fitted it for. So you do have to allow for a little bitty tiny space for those layers of silicone. All right, so I think I am going to want to put another washer in this handle. I'm not going to do that today because I just put this on a few hours ago. I like to let it dry. In this case, I'm going to let it dry for about a day. Now, technically, even when you do a full fit with the knot and everything, people say let it dry for a day. I've had that, especially if it's hard for air to get in. I think it takes a little bit longer than that. I've had one pop off because it wasn't cured. So my safe bet, 3 days. When I set up a knot, it's finally in. I look at the 3rd day. Usually I'm doing it in the evening. So the evening of the 3rd day, I can use it. So that's my personal rule. Maybe 2 days is exactly the same. Maybe you could do that. But I think 1 day is a little bit less than you should do it for. So 2 or 3 days is my recommendation. So let's move along. So we do the dry fit. Now I know that I want to just let this guy, which has the potential to be quite firm, splay as much as he can. I don't want the handle to restrict him. And so I'm going to mount him at the higher point where I have 2 washers instead of just the 1. So later on today, I'll probably mount the second washer, and then the next day, I'll probably mount the knot. And I'll try to do that on video. I'll try to do each of these steps in video. I'm outlining all the steps right now in this first clip, and then in the future, I don't have to necessarily talk as much. I apologize if I do duplicate. I might not remember that I've said certain things, but maybe a little duplication would be cool because it can help it with you. And because this is a lot, in a way, it's super simple. Once you know how, it's really simple. Handle, knot, clean them up, figure out the spacing, glue them together. That's it. It's very simple. But there are some details to think about, and that's what we're covering. Okay, so we did the dry fit. I know that I eventually do want to add in 1 more washer. So now we're going to wrap the knot in a rubber band. So I'm going to squeeze it. I'm going to start here at the glue ball and then pull gently a little bit because I want to try to reduce the possibility of some curly guys right there. And so I'm going to start right there. And this is a big rubber band, but this is just the one that was on hand. And then my tip, and I've definitely done this before, where I have had some bristles to kind of come up in a hump right there, right beside, because I just put the rubber band maybe a little too far away, and then it gradually got closer. And so my tip is start with the rubber band close, and then as you kind of do this loopy thing that we all do to make rubber bands work, make that go that way and finish on this side. And see, look, we don't have any. Oh, we have one little guy right there sticking up. Oh, and he's actually a broken bristle. Okay. So we don't have any, and I don't think that's important. That's happened to me where I've had some little guys buckle a little bit, and it's always worked out. So don't be concerned if that happens to you. I try to avoid it just for grins, but and also look at your knot, because if you've rubber banded it crooked, then you want to know that, because as you have, that's something we actually should have checked before. During our dry fit, push it down and look at it and turn it. Make sure it's sitting flat. Make sure it's sitting straight up. Make sure this is flat down in the bottom. And you don't want to have it too tilted. Now, a little bit of tilt for certain brush types is fine. I've definitely had that happen to me with silver tips and boar knots. They tend to expand more as they get used. And so that tiny bit of off-center variation is not going to be noticed. At least it hasn't been in my case. With something like a synthetic, they tend to hold their shape more. Maybe with the finest badger, because they have more backbone and also tend to hold their shape a little more. Not as bad as synthetics, but then it might be more important to make sure you get it nice and straight up. Oh, now looky here. Actually, that shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to pull that back. It is touching the handle, but I am going to have one more spacer in there, so it's probably not going to matter. But I'm going to roll it back. And there we go. We don't have any rubber band touching the handle. And so you can just make sure, and I've already done this before, but matter of fact, let me go ahead and take the rubber band off because I want to illustrate it properly. So here we are, we're doing the dry fit. You push it down flat, and then look, rotate the brush and look to see if it's tilted, like that. That would be tilted. This one looks pretty good. So it looks like all of our surfaces are even. So we're good. Now I'm going to wrap the rubber band back around the handle. You know what? I'll go ahead and show you just in case. I grab here and then move my hand along. That way I'm kind of gently pulling the bristles, then getting them out of my way. And then I'll start right around there. And I'm keeping the tension. Oop. Using my thumb there to kind of keep the tension. There we go. And then move it along away from the plug. And this all moving away from the plug, instead of just having one area where the rubber band is doing its work, it's handy because that spreads out the pressure, and you're gonna your bristles aren't going to be as mangled, and they're not going to be mangled. I've never had a problem after. All right, there we go. So push that guy down in, and now what we want to do is just make sure he doesn't pop back out. We don't want him to pull, because if he does splay out so much right here above the glue ball, the plug, then maybe we need to figure out a way to put something on top for a while he's drying, to make sure that he stays in place. Now this guy, he's staying in place nicely. He's a little tilted, but that's because I wrapped the rubber band in a tilty kind of way. So I'm not worried about that. All right, so next step, we have put the rubber band on the knot, and we've already kind of talked about how deep we want to set it. Use the washers to get the right loft. The 3/8" washers that I was able to get from the hardware shop work really well for 22 millimeter knots all the way up to 26, probably even 28. And actually having a knot that's a touch smaller than the hole is kind of nice if it's a used handle, because that means you're inside of the hole a little bit. And so if you have a little bit extra glue scraping from the old knot on the corners, it doesn't matter, because the washer doesn't go all the way out to the very edges of the hole. We already talked about the angle of the knot, making sure it's right. And then we need to get our silicone ready, and then put silicone in the washers. So let's take a look at the silicone. Now I have put a rubber band around mine because I keep a paper clip handy for unclogging this guy. Now when you buy this stuff, if you don't know about silicone, it usually comes all the way to the top and it's closed up. And that's good because you want it to be sealed during transit. You actually have to take a good sharp knife, utility knife, something like that. And now I did mine a very small hole for a good year or two, and I've recently opened up the hole, and I'm glad that I did, because it's much easier to get this product out. I would have to use this to shove it down in there and get that, because a plug will develop after you've used it that clogs up everything. And I've had to try to push that plug away, and oh man, I was squeezing. Now with this bigger hole, I don't think that's going to be a problem. But you do need to squeeze a little bit of it out and make sure you do not want to take that hard plug and put it in your handle, because that's not going to align everything right at all. So give yourself a nice little slash cut, diagonal cut tip there. And then you would dollop, dollop, dollop. Small amount in there. Seal it back up. Okay. So, do any washers. Now, you could silicone a washer, then put silicone a washer, and then your knot all in the same day if you wanted to. I prefer spacing it out a little bit. That way I know my washers aren't going to move or get off center. They'll be perfectly centered by the time it comes time for my knot to go on. If you're like me and you wait, make sure you after your washers are all glued down, dry fit it again to make sure it hasn't gotten too tall. If it's showing a little bit of that glue bump down there at the bottom, the glue ball, then the root ball, that's too high. Usually, if you like it, then great. So dry fit before you do the brush, the knot in there. After you've got all your washers glued in, you bind it with a rubber band. So I'm actually now that I've done the dry fit, I'm going to take the rubber band off, and he's going to wait. I'm only going to put the rubber band in next when the knot is ready to go in the handle. Okay. I've already told you about how much silicone to use, the equivalent of maybe 2 peas worth, or 2 balls that are about 6 millimeters in diameter, 7 millimeters maybe, if you don't know what American peas, how big they are. And I like to use 3 balls, but I'll use it less. So if it was 3 balls, I'd probably do maybe 4 millimeters, approximately a little clod of about 4 millimeters in 3 different spots, like a triangle, on there, because, and you don't have to spread it around or anything like that, because when you press the washer down in there, that kind of spreads it out on its own. And when we press the brush knot down in there, we'll give it a twist, and that'll spread it around as well. Now you can spread it just a little bit with the tip of the applicator here, but you definitely don't need to try to get in there with your finger and spread it around or anything like that. That'll probably cause more problems or mess, because if you can help it and not get any silicone on the sides of the inside of the socket there, that'll be great. So then we'll summarize the rest now, because that'll come with future clips. Push the knot in all the way, and then hold it there for a little while. And then as you release pressure, look at it, make sure it's not pulling itself back out. And then right as you push it in, give it a twist. Gentle, not pushing super hard. You don't want to push all the silicone away from the contact points. You still want to leave some silicone in there. So push it in, firm pressure, but just not super hard. And then give it that twist, like a quarter turn, usually is about all I need to do. And that helps to spread the glue around, the silicone. And then, like I said, I like to let mine sit and use it on the 3rd day. And wait to remove the rubber band until you're ready to use it, or until that 3rd day. Don't remove the rubber band before you know that it's cured. And those are the steps. And in terms of maintenance, there's no maintenance needed, except for what I like to always recommend. Do not use hot water when you soak your brush prior to use, because that is, and I think this is many cases, this is why many brushes have the knots just pop off. Maybe even epoxy was used, but maybe the maker didn't quite use very much because they're trying to cut down on costs or speed, but the heat from you using or soaking your brush in hot water causes expansion and then contraction as it cools down. And over time, that expansion and contraction can work on that glue, and that can cause that knot to eventually pop right out. Silicone has a little bit more give to it, but I still do not recommend using hot water, soaking your brush in hot water. I just use cool water, lukewarm water. I don't even use warm, but I do recognize that a lot of you guys out there enjoy your warm lather shaves, but definitely don't use hot. And also, when you are soaking your brush, I recommend only the bristles be soaked. A lot of guys will throw their whole brush into the sink of water. If it's cold, that might not be too bad, or lukewarm, that might not be too bad. But if it's warm, then that's gonna get, the water's gonna get everywhere, and it's gonna cause expansion and contraction everywhere. Whereas if you've got a little cup like I do, it's easy to soak just the bristles. And that's what I recommend. Each day, as you're shaving, just soak the bristles only, and then you pretty much never have to worry about the knot becoming unglued or any kind of problems like that. All right, well, I believe that's it for now, for this intro version, and we'll see you again tomorrow as and this time I think I'll be able to show you the process of putting in the silicone and what it looks like, and then pressing the washer into that one. And then following that will probably be the clip where we affix the knot. All right, now it's later on in the day. We have a nicely sealed in, fairly dry washer in there. Here's his buddy. I did dry fit the knot into the space now, and it still, I think, needs a little more height. So let's go ahead and put the second washer in there too. So I've got the same silicone that I used. And Hopefully I haven't got any little clogs. And I put about 4 little dollops in there. None of them look like hard clogs. And now I'm just going to show you, so you know approximately how much. And that's definitely not too much. And so now I'm just going to push them down in there, give it a slight turn so that we spread the silicone around. And then I'm going to get rid of the excess silicone that's coming in the middle of the washer, because I don't want that to affect the knot later. I just want that to kind of be flush. There we go. So it's just sitting in there. And now, in just a few hours, 6 hours, whatever, it's nighttime now, so by the morning, I think we'll be ready to set the knot into the handle. Also, I didn't want to forget, I think I did in the intro part where I talked about all the steps. SugarDaddyShaves.com is a website I've recently put up, and it will share any of the information that I commonly give out to people. I'm going to start trying to put on there and just have some good info, because I may share something in a video, I may give some advice at some point, and it's just good not to have to write those kind of things over and over. Also, if I put in a little bit of excerpt of text and then I put in a URL for that kind of write-up, then if a person ever goes to it and information has changed or been updated, then the website will always have the most recent info. And so it's SugarDaddyShaves.com, and my username on YouTube has no vowels except for the Y. So it's SGRDDDY_shaves. Now that part has vowels, that's normal. But my username part does have just the no vowels. Now the website is not the same way. Everything's spelled out. There's no underscores or spaces, of course. And so it's SUGARDADDY shaves.com. And so if you look on the left side menu, one of those is going to be how to set a brush knot, or maybe there's a how-to section, or if I ever change the URL, I will put it into the description of this video to get you there. So that I don't think too much new information is going to come across. However, you know what? I saw one guy, I think it's the guy from Craving Shaving, and I think what he did was take a couple of disc magnets. He glued one end into the handle, the other end onto the end of the knot. And so there are those rare earth magnets that are super strong. And I think he just, and so then, but it makes it easy to take them in and out. You could even swap and stuff like that. Now that would be really interesting if it works. And I don't think he'd be posting it probably if it didn't work. But at any rate, I don't think there's going to be too much that's going to change with this specific how-to. But just in case, you can refer to the website for instructions. I'll probably also put embed this very video into that page as well, so you can see the content as well as the video at the same time. So I don't know if this is a turn and shave handle. I'm not really sure. I picked it up at the PIF table at the 2019 Carolina meetup in Greensboro in September. And hey, don't forget to monitor your surfaces, and if you get a little silicone on there, it's just so easy to wipe it off when it's not dry yet. And there we go. We'll wait for the knot. All right, it's the next day. The second washer that I put in is all sealed up now, cured. So I've got my same silicone, and I've got my knot ready now. Again, this is a finest badger, maybe super, some kind of a little extra than finest, a little extra word like Finest Superior or something like that from the Golden Nib, and it's I think it's like a 24 or 26 millimeter knot, and so we're ready to put it in. You can dry fit it now that the washers are hard in place, and you can check it, turn it, and see. Push it down a little bit so you can see if it tilts in a weird way. Everything looks fine. There was one angle earlier where it was a little tilted, but it was enough where I don't think it's going to matter at all. This will splay a little bit with some use, and I think it'll look just fine. Okay, and so first before we put our dabs of silicone in the handle, we're going to do what I did in that intro video about the rubber band. And this is not any kind of special technique or anything, just put the rubber band around the knot. And I like to hold the hairs pretty firmly, and it just keeps them from twisting around and any of that stuff. Yeah, there we go. See, we do have one little guy who's kind of flexing up like that, but that should be just fine. Okay, so now before we do glue, always dry fit first. Make sure it sits nicely in there, and you can turn it to see if maybe it looks, if it fits equally, if it goes down equally the same, no matter which rotation you do, that kind of thing. Everything looks good. It does look a little tilted, but that's probably because my rubber band is pulling it in a certain direction. Okay, now I have not roughed up the base of this knot. I don't usually do that. If my knots start popping out after a while, then obviously I might do something like that. But I haven't really felt the need yet. And I definitely haven't had any pop out that had an adequate amount of glue on them. So, all right. So now I'm going to put my little dabs of glue. Put my glasses in bifocal mode here. And again, we do not. I'm going to go ahead and put little 4 dabs, kind of like I did before. What we don't want to do is have the glue come out and go up the sides of the knot and start to touch the hairs. It's not too bad if it comes up the sides of this plug here, but we don't want it to come up to the hairs. And so there we go. That looks about like the right amount. And one thing that concerns me with the way I did it there, they're a little close to the inside of the washer. I bet it would be okay, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the nozzle and just kind of push them out a little bit. And it may actually do a more of a pickup job than a push job, and so I may have to actually squeeze in another little bit. And remember, once we put the, that's plenty. Once we put the knot in, we're going to twist it, and that will help. And so you don't need to spread it around. Like you can see, hopefully right up there at the top, or now toward near my finger, there's an area of the washer that doesn't have any silicone on it. That's not a big deal at all, because we're going to push and twist. Okay, so yeah. I feel like some of it's going to go down in that hole, which is just fine. And so I feel like this amount of silicone is going to work well. All right, I'm excited because I love when I've completed a shaving task, a little DIY project. And so now there's the twist. And that's all there is to it. Not a super firm pressure, but just enough to get it down in there. Make sure it doesn't lift back out because of some kind of issue with the bristles, flexing or anything like that. And now I'm just going to let him sit. Like I said before, 2 days is probably a good amount to let it all cure properly. I like to go 3 just to make absolutely sure. I believe I've done 1 before and it popped out, like I said earlier. So 2 is probably a safe bet. I've got enough stuff to play with while I wait for a 3rd day. So today, it's kind of midday right now. So not tomorrow, Yeah. So 3 days. I think that's it. That's how I set a knot, and it seems to be working. I've got a lot of brushes. I've done it many times, and I've used them a lot, and so I think it's holding up nicely. So that's the way I set knots, and I hope that it helps you out. Hey, you take care. This is Sugar Daddy Shaves. Bye. Hey guys, I was really looking forward to today, where I could check out my golden nib finest badger. It's a 2-band knot because we have such a thick dark section here, and then the white or the lighter color. Golden nib 2-band knot. I can't remember if this is a turn and shave handle. I'm not really sure. It's really beautiful. I like the dark color, reds, bronze type color. Anyway, I was a little scared because I've pulled off the rubber band, and I was feeling of the backbone and the density, and man, it was stiff. But after having it in some water for 15 minutes, it feels very soft. It's moving around easily. And here is the final appearance of the brush. Has not been used yet. It's just been wet. We'll see some, these tips of the 2-band knots. Many of them are treated, bleached, that sort of thing, to make them softer. And so we'll see if these gel up or if they don't. I have tried a 2-band from Golden Nib once, and I really enjoyed it, but it was in a handle that I did not enjoy, so I passed it on, but I made a note, let's pick up that knot someday. Well, here it is. So I'm going to have a shave with it here in just a couple minutes, and I'm going to be using my Rockwell 6C and some Omega Aqua hard puck of soap, and it will actually be the 240th use of my Nacet. How about that, huh? And so there we go. So you can look for that video. I'll try to link to it in the description for you. We'll see how this it feels promising. Feels good. All right. Well, that's it. That's the end of how to make a brush, how I knot up a brush. So I can link all these videos together and put it out there for you guys. And hopefully it'll help folks. This is Sugar Daddy Shaves. You take care.